Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. One of the joys of SoccerX is that we can have guests who aren't necessarily from football or from soccer. And that's particularly useful and significant and valuable this year, I think, for the following reasons. Those of you who love cricket will know that we've just completed an Ashes summer, except for the fact we have one-day matches underway, and the next of those is here in Manchester at Old Trafford Cricket Ground tomorrow. In 4 days' time, there's a little rugby tournament starting called the Rugby World Cup. And we look forward to that very much. And then, of course, next year, a year today, the Paralympics start. And next year is, of course, Rio 2016, as the memories of London 2012 fade. So are there lessons to learn for soccer from elsewhere? And do other sports learn lessons from us? Those are the questions that I want to ask our distinguished group of practitioners today. We're joined by Darren Lehman, the senior coach of Australia, and you're very welcome, Darren. He has to leave on the dot of 12:30 for a practice session.
We need a lot of practice at the moment.
And Andrew Strauss, the director of England Cricket. Andrew, you're very welcome. And we have Ian Ritchie sitting next to me, the chief executive of the Rugby Football Union. And Simon Timpson is the director of performance for UK Sport. Let's start then with Ian, if I may. What is to you, what do you mean by a winning sporting culture? Do you think it's a meaningful expression?
I think it is. I think you've got to look at a broader culture. There's the particular skills, but I think what we're all looking for is sustainable success as well. And I think particularly in I can only really talk a little bit about rugby, is the culture and the team ethic is, I think, extremely important. And what Stuart Lancaster looked at when he started with the England team was to build that culture. And I think the culture came before the levels of performance. You get the culture right, then you feel that the performance will come on, and therefore it develops from there. So I think there is a winning team culture and performance, and I think making that sustainable is what is the most difficult thing as well. But you're judged by that.
Simon, what do you mean by a culture, a winning culture?
I think there's two key components to any winning culture, and one without the other isn't going to succeed. There's the what you need to do and the how you need to do it. And for me, the what you need to do is to define a really valid, reliable model of what it takes to win in your sport. And I think that goes whatever sport. It needs to transcend the received wisdoms of the game, the traditions of the game, and really focus on what does it take to succeed. And then there's the how you do it. And I think that this often gets forgotten. It is the cultural bit of a transformational approach to delivering that model of what it takes to win. The way that you engage your players, the way that you engage your staff around a set of common goals and really driving and uniting behind a single focus.
But you're responsible for, 40 sports or so? Can weightlifting learn anything from athletics?
Absolutely, and we have a process called Mission 2016. It's an audit we do with every sport once a year. It has a external facilitator and a peer reviewer from a different sport. So it's aimed to move knowledge and understanding around the high performance system. And we interrogate each sport across 18 elements of best practice in delivering a high performance program. And one of those dimensions is the cultural dimension, the system dimension.
Darren, I remember going to a conference at Lord's Cricket Ground, 2000, somewhere perhaps even before then. And there were a number of Aussies there. And we were learning, the Brits were learning from the Aussies. Do you think there is a different culture, sporting culture in the UK, in England, from Australia?
I think they're getting very similar. We see, for example, the way England are playing now is very similar to the way Australia have played for a long period of time, I would say. But culture, it's a great word, isn't it? A winning culture, or what creates it. Winning helps, for a start. If you're losing, you seem to have a poor culture. behind the scenes. But end of the day, for the Australian cricket team, our focus is culture as such is about actually providing tools for the players off the ground. We actually think we can teach them all the skills on the ground, albeit in the test matches you might not have seen that. But for us, their lives are a bit more important. We really focus on their family, their lives, and making sure they're right off the field, mentally, physically, so they can perform at the level they need to against England in Ashes series, for example, or one-day games. And you've got to remember, in cricket, it's a bit different to other sports because we travel, well, I think it's about 300 days a year, Andrew. So you're only home 2 months of the year. So you've got all these different dynamics that create its own family or culture in a way.
Do you think your culture, Andrew, is significantly different from Darren's in Australia?
Not really. I think that's one of the great things about Ashes cricket in general, or competitions between Australia and England, is actually it's quite a good-natured rivalry, and there's not that much difference between the nations in terms of how they go about their sport. So I don't think there is anything massively different there. I think for me, culture is one of those very intangible things that's hard to put your finger on. And because it's intangible, it's hard to define it easily. I think you see demonstrations or illustrations of culture by how the team operate. You can watch a team and go, oh, that looks like they've got a strong culture there. But it's hard for anyone to come in, I suppose in my position, to go in and go, right, we're going to change the culture. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4.
But you have changed the culture, haven't you, of English
Well,
cricket?
and I think it's an ongoing thing. And I suppose that's my point, is that the way you can maybe influence a culture rather than change it is just by nudging people in the right direction, nudging behaviour, putting in these little symbols and rituals to try and sort of just gradually gravitate people in a certain direction. But I think Darren's point is a really important one. Actually, cultures are made and broken by people. It's all about people. It's about how people interact with each other. And so we can look at things in a very systematic way, but actually it's about appreciating that these guys aren't commodities. They are people that have families, they have difficulties away from cricket, and the more you're able to make them feel part of something special, a special kind of family, I think the more they're likely to buy into whatever you're trying to do.
Darren, I was lucky enough to be pretty close to the English soccer team for 13 years. I observe it now and I think to myself, we made huge progress on the physical development of players. We made rather less progress in this generation on the mental development of players. Do you think that's fair?
Very much so. I'd also say it's football, not soccer, for an Australian.
Okay.
We always say football as well now. So it's a world game, a global game. But the mental side of sport is huge, especially in cricket. I think all the athletes around whatever sport it is, I presume the same with all the different sports you have, Tim, and obviously the Rugby World Cup, that they've got all the skills normally. It's the mental side of performing in front of big crowds. We take a look at a young debutant for us in Marcus Stoinis, who dropped a catch at Lords, and he came off the ground. He really struggled with just the perception of he couldn't believe so many people were around watching him play the game. And
how do you deal with that? What do you say to him then?
Catch the ball next time. Yeah. But you talk him through those scenarios, and that's how they're going to become better players. So there's no doubt, it'll take them players a while to understand the rigours of international cricket and the spotlight. Media is huge in any sport now, and the social media is big for younger players and younger athletes. So for us, it's about talking through those issues all the time, and we use a sports psych now more than probably any other cricket team, I would think. He comes away with us a lot, just to deal with issues a way that players might not want to speak about with their coach or their high performance director and all those sorts of things.
Let me ask you, Darren, now then, is there an example in a specific sport that you sort of think, say British cycling, say whatever, that you think that was a winning culture that was developed?
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, I looked at British cycling and most recently British rowing. I've just come home from the Rowing World Championships in France over the weekend, and Great Britain dominated, 15 medals, top the table, New Zealand second with 6. And that culture and that program has been built over the last 15 to 20 years by Sir David Tanner. And they live and breathe the philosophy of a very clearly defined model of what it takes to win that's been developed by the coaches, the sports scientists and the athletes together. And you can see each boat knows exactly what it needs to do. They know how to prepare. They've got a fantastic setup in the team hotel for recovery and preparation. They've got the equivalent of a tented village, in the boatyard where the athletes prepare and recover after every race. And I think that's one of the things that allows them to be so successful. They all know what the goal is. And anybody who watched the rowers interviewed after their races in London will have seen that the level of dissatisfaction with a silver or a bronze medal, because they were there to win gold. And they're all united behind that pursuit of excellence, and they know what they need to do day in, day out, week in, week out to do it.
Is there a sport you admire, another sport you admire?
I think lots of sports, because I remember I was very fortunate to spend some time with Tom Gorman when he was the captain of the US Davis Cup team, and I had this discussion about the mental side with him and what was he doing in terms of the coaching. And his team was Pete Sampras and Andre Agassi. And he said, I'm not going to show them how to hit a forehand, but what I am going to talk to them about is the mental side of how we're going to work together as a team when we're in the Davis Cup, as opposed to being separate to that. And I think, if I may, going back as well to interchangeability, I smile slightly. I think we're all in this situation now where the 4 home nations at rugby have 3 Kiwi coaches. I was in a meeting not long ago to say, well, what are we going to do about the next Lions tour to New Zealand?
Do you worry about that?
And, well, I think, no, I don't think so, because I think that everybody's professional. I think it's transferable skills.
But they have Aussie... the Australians have Aussie coaches, don't they?
Yeah.
Well, we had a Kiwi coach for a while for the Wallabies, and we've brought in an Aussie coach now. I don't think it matters where the coach comes from. It's what the coach is going to deliver for that team at the time. England are a perfect example. Trevor Bayliss is a perfect fit for that team right now. Darren Lehmann is a fit for the Australian team right now, but it might be a different style of coach or manager in the future, because you might have younger guys, and it's just got to change with the times, I suppose.
I think the interesting bit, though, is I think it's right. You look at, and when we were doing the recruitment process for Stuart Lancaster, of course there was an element of a plus point, but we wanted the best coach we could get, and we certainly didn't do the, isn't it great to have somebody use English as opposed to a South Africa or an Australian in terms of that. I think one of the other sides of it, though, is there is that broader, whether it's mental or cultural thing. I think there's a very interesting thing about how you make sure that your team feel committed for the shirt and what they're going to do, and how you can inspire that, because that's the hugely important aspect that I'm sure everybody works on. And I think that's where it comes back to the cultural side, especially if you've had cultures that have been difficult. I mean, it's all about management styles and how do you approach that situation. I mean, Stuart, I always remember that great thing where as a this is a management thing, I think, as much as anything, got all their mothers and fathers to write in separately as to what it meant for them that their child was playing for England, and then he got them all in a room and stuck it up on the wall. And so everybody came in and read what it meant for their mum and dad that they were playing for England. It was a highly emotional, charged moment, because that's really part of the mental side. You want to make sure that everybody is 110% committed to the cause, and that's the cultural side, and committed to each other as well. So I think those are the issues.
Let's talk about your own roles then in creating winning cultures. Darren, I mean, where do your responsibilities begin and end now as senior coach of Australia? Is it just the senior team?
Yes and no. The yes is the fact that you're away 300 days a year with them. So you're like the father figure, if you like, and you're trying to mould a team into playing the type of cricket you need to win and sustain success over a long period of time. And then you've got the younger guys, the A group, that are coming through, and they filter in and out. Probably you've seen a few of them in the one-day series. And you've got to try and marry that big group up together at the right time to perform, say, for a home World Cup. We're already looking at the 2019 World Cup, for example, and some of the players that might get there for that, because we're playing in England, obviously. So it's a bigger group, if you like, and you need really good staff that can gel that group in the middle, I suppose, and make sure you have the faith in them that they're going to deliver the player to you in the right way, and we're lucky enough we have some great state coaches in Justin Langer and some really good coaches at our NCC, very much like the Loughborough set up in England. So for me it starts with the prep for a long period of time, but also making sure their lives are right. If we get that right, we'll be able to do the skills and they just stack up on each other, and then they become very good players and a very good team.
Andrew, I have to ask you, I mean, you were quoted in the press this weekend saying, at least half the coaches I played under made the teams worse. Now, I mean, name them.
I'm glad I didn't coach.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a little bit of a throwaway comment, to be honest. But look, I think in a cricket environment, it's tough. You know, I think it's not like athletics where you are an individual and you have your own coach that you work with who knows your game inside out and can make minor adjustments to you to help you get better. I think a cricket coach is trying to manage a group of people. I think too often, and I'm not talking about international cricket, I'm talking about lower down the levels, coaches feel like they need to coach all the time. So therefore they'll see someone and go, you need to change this, this and this because if you watch the way Sachin Tendulkar plays, he does that. And actually, I think more experienced, better coaches realise when not to coach and when to coach. And that's a hard thing. And you probably learn by experience. You probably learn by making mistakes as well. So I think the closer you get to international cricket, most of those coaches have made those mistakes already and do add value. But my general view and philosophy on coaching at the top level is there is so much pressure there. Darren talked about the media scrutiny, the being away from home, incredible pressure on you to perform day in, day out. And what good coaches do in cricket, I think, at the top level is they take pressure off. So they provide a very supportive environment. They offer people advice, but they allow players to take ownership of their own game. And I think it's a little bit kind of contrary to the kind of cult of the coach that's developing in other sports. You look at football and the managers, the big man, he's making all the decisions. I think in cricket it's a slightly different model, and you need a different type of coach.
Do you, Darren, something that some of us cricket lovers in England don't understand? When we hear the Australian cricket captain doesn't have a say in the team that he plays with, what do we understand? Why is that so different from England, for example?
That's not quite right, in the fact that in my time as coach, for example, I think maybe Michael didn't get the side maybe once that he didn't want. Yeah. So he was a selector beforehand, then obviously didn't want to be a selector because of all the other, you got to get out and see all the state players, etc., and a lot more meetings. But the captain's a very influential part in cricket. The captain's got to be really comfortable with the team he takes out. So we get the captain involved in the pre-selection of touring teams, for example, and then we'll make the final decisions as such. But in terms of each match, he would get a say 99% of the time in what he wants, and that's important because once we prepare the players as a coach or a management group, if you like, he really becomes the coach, the captain, everything on the field because he makes the decisions. And really, we just guide him along the way. At lunch, the captain will come off. We might have a chat. What do you think about this, this, and this? End of the day, it's his decision because he's got to feel really comfortable with that.
And I must ask you, while you're here, about the team behind the team, because Ian, I suspect, will hear much about this in the next few weeks as well. We were always criticised with the England football team as the team behind the team got bigger and bigger and bigger. I walked into your team hotel in London before the Lord's Test that you did rather well in, and I thought the team behind the team seemed to be huge.
Yeah, it's big. It's getting bigger. I sent a few home actually to have a rest, but the shorter the team would be better because you have less complications. But the demands that players want as well, you've got to meet those. So you need a certain size, and I think we're about exactly the same as England with staffing, and we're trying to cut it back if possible.
And the WAGs? You have the WAGs?
Yeah, well, I don't want divorces on my hands for a start. When you're away that much, I'm happy with partners to travel I don't think there's an issue there. It certainly doesn't make them play badly or make them play better. It makes their lives better. That's where I sit with that. So for us, the team within the team are really important because they just, they're there to do their job and employed, etc., and look after the players. But they have as many issues as the players sometimes. So we've got to make sure we look after them. And, I have a lot of sessions with our psychologists as well. Looking after, the Australian cricket team's not easy. It's a great job and I love it, but you also need help outside of the game. So we're always looking at different ways we can do things and making sure people get breaks, whether it's players or staff, and they're just as important as the players.
Andrew, do you miss being a player?
Not
Walking
when
down the
Johnson
steps at
started
Lord's
steaming in at the lads. No, not really. Look, I think you have moments where you saw the England team bouncing up and down, having won at Trent Bridge, and you think those are the moments that you relish, and that's all the work you do. That's the reason you do it. So there's always going to be a tinge of kind of jealousy, I suppose. You want to be there, but I think for me, I've been lucky enough to experience some of that, and you get some reflected glory by doing this type of job, and you kind of feel like you are making some decisions that hopefully will help the team perform in the long run. It's not so much a here and now type job. You're thinking, in my case, 2019 is a real focus with the Ashes and the World Cup, and it's nice to be involved. It's nice to have the blood pumping through your veins and feeling a bit nervous when the guys go out there. It's a good feeling.
I'm conscious of Darren's time, but I just want to ask you one last question before 12:30. Do you love soccer?
Football, yeah.
Football, yes. Okay. Do you learn lessons from football?
Yeah, you do. I think it's the size of the game. It's a world game. It's bigger than, you got the Olympics, then you've got the Football World Cup, for example. Then you've got the Rugby and the Cricket World Cup that sit probably below that. The pressure, the media hype, how they're so accessible in a lot of ways. They're always using the latest technology, and you're always trying to catch up because they're ahead of the game, because they're going to spend so much more money in their departments, I suppose. They probably spend more money than a lot of the Olympic teams that are preparing their teams for those sports. So they're always at a bit of an advantage. You always look at how they can get better or how you can use some of their tools, and vice versa for them. There's things that we probably do better than football, for example. I mean, they're different type of athletes from cricket to football. We're big on our weights and strength and program with fast bowlers bowling 150 clicks, and their core has to be as strong as maybe a rower for that example. So it's really interesting to watch the world game grow, and football is a world game. So I'm really impressed with the way they let media in. Probably cricket don't do it as well as we probably could, to be fair, letting media in more. But that's an interesting one for me.
And a final thought, does losing sometimes in the longer term in creating a winning culture, does it help?
Well, losing normally creates selection debates, and you normally have a turnover of players, and we've obviously seen that with a few retirements we've had so far. So we're going to have a younger team to deal with. What it means is you have to find the right balance between experience and youth, and still passing on the knowledge that you want to create this sustainable team that can play for 2019, for example, Ashes and World Cup. So for us, that's the challenge with the young group. But the pleasing thing, our experienced players have been so good for so long that they've taught these younger players a lot about what we want to do and how we want to do it, which makes it a lot easier to transfer.
Ladies and gentlemen, Darren Lehman, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Oh, mate.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me ask you then, Simon, now, how much responsibility should you as the Director of Performance take for our performance, for the UK's performance, for Great Britain's performance in Rio?
Well, of course, I have to take some degree of responsibility. And the way I see it, I have three core responsibilities. Firstly, ensure that we invest the right resources into the right sports and athletes to maximise the probability of us being more successful in Rio than we were in London. And we measure that in quite a simple way, more medals. So we want to win 66 Olympic and 121 Paralympic medals in Rio.
That's more than London.
More than London, the first nation to do it. is the aspiration.
And that's realistic.
It's within scope. We know
Is it realistic?
We know it's going to be a huge challenge, and the sports are telling us at the moment that it's still possible. If you look at history, the Australians were 12% worse in 2004 in Athens than they were in Sydney. The Chinese were 12% worse in London than they were in Beijing 4 years before. So it's a significant ask, but it's a challenge that we think we're quite capable of meeting for a variety of different reasons. We sustain the National Lottery investment into high-performance sports. We have the privilege of investing in an 8-year pathway rather than a 4-year project, as most nations do. So we've known and been working with many of the athletes that we think are going to win medals in Rio next year since the day the Beijing Games finished in 2008. So there's lots to give us cause for optimism, but let's face it, it's a huge, huge challenge that lies ahead of us to realise that in the next 12 months. So then the second level of responsibility is to ensure that we support the sports that we invest in the right ways, that we help them deliver elite coaches and develop them for the next 12 months and the long-term future. And it was really interesting listening to the conversation earlier. And I think there's a couple of key principles, and I completely agree, Andrew, with your perspective on coaches can add or detract value at times. And I think we often forget there's a crucial difference between technical coaching and kind of arena coaching in the heat of battle in a match or at a major championships. And I've always lived by a simple principle of the major event. I caught myself doing it several times over the weekend. If in doubt, say nothing. It is what I'm going to say to this athlete or this coach in this moment as their rowers take the boat off the stand to go out onto the water, going to help their performance in any way, shape or form. And if it's not, keep quiet and just look confident and try and give them some confidence.
Have you watched, though, soccer coaches, particularly soccer coaches, on the touchline in the technical area, whether they step outside it or not, shouting, screaming, and so often not being heard or having to rely on whoever's this side of the pitch getting a message across and it doesn't quite get across and it changes in its interpretation. I've had players say to me after a game, I had no idea what he was talking about. I mean, is that, do you understand that?
I do, and if I think back to my own career, 7 years going downhill fast in a bobsleigh, when it came to race day, I just wanted confidence and assurance from my coaches. By the time we stepped on the block, there was very little they could do to help us start fast and drive quickly. And I think, you know, I look at Sir David Tanner over the weekend, and David said to me on Thursday morning, you know, you won't see me do much here this weekend because my job's done. And I think a good performance director's job is always to be at least 1 year ahead of where the team is right now and planning for the future. I mean, we're about to start the investment process next week for Tokyo 2020. So we're 5 years ahead of current day performance. And the performance director and the leader of the team should have an eye on who needs support, who needs help, and, you know, support first, challenge second. And just help athletes be well prepared and focused on what they need to do. But it does come back to that key principle of knowing what you need to do. Have you got a clear plan? And is that plan based on what it actually takes to win in that sport? Very clearly defined, not some traditions and received wisdom. So if I do a really simple example to help people understand what I mean. If you think about the men's 1,500 metres on the track at the Olympic Games, in order to win, you have to run a sub 53 second last 400 metres. And okay, this is relatively easy in a time-based sport. And you have to be able to do that off whatever pace the first 1,100 metres is run at. Slow, medium, fast, and with people elbowing you in the guts and trying to get in your way that you've got to run around. So does all your preparation and planning and training reflect the capability to run 53 seconds off different paced first 1,100 metres with people getting in your way? Because if it doesn't, and you've not got a clear plan for doing that, it doesn't matter how good your culture is and how happy and motivated your staff are, you're simply not going to win. So the two have to go hand in hand fundamentally. And that's, if you like, the third part of my responsibility, looking forward to Rio, is the constant monitoring, tracking and review of what each of the 40 world-class programs are doing in preparation for Rio that we invest in, to make sure that their Rio-ready plans are really clear and really simple and calmly and assuredly implemented over the next 12 months.
Ian, as you're planning about now, this is it, isn't it? This is the climax.
Well, it is, but it can't be about now. And just if I may go back to that broader question you asked earlier about connectivity, obviously from where I'm sitting, definitely not a performance expert, is about connections between the elite and the elite performance and right the way through the game. I think it's very important, certainly as far as we're concerned, I think it's true of most sports as well, is that you see a connectivity between the elite squad and the team right the way through to somebody who's running out for an under-8s on a Sunday morning in whatever part of the country, that you see that there is an ability to move through a pathway, that you see a connection. I mean, the elite squad are the ultimate shop window, if I can put it that way, to persuade people to be in the sport, which is why it's right again to see that cultural thing. I remember many years ago going to a rugby club, and this parent said to me that my son was playing rugby, he was 9, because of the values of the game and how that worked. And I think sometimes it's not right that we have the elite squad in a bubble somewhere over there and that they don't have a correlation into the grassroots, the community of the game, especially if one of your objectives is, of course, we want an elite performance squad to win, but you want to grow the game as a whole
The
as
elite
well.
squad in a bubble. Do you think that describes English soccer?
Well, I think not, and I'm sure that there's a lot of correlation between coaches and coaching team, and look at that. I think you've got to be a lot closer to the community, and I think I always love it. Stuart still coaches. In fact, he's the assistant coach of his under-14s team back at his local club, and I think it's very important for us to see that connection.
I never
with
remember
the players and
Sven-Göran
the coaches.
Eriksson doing that.
No, I don't think Sven-Göran Eriksson would do it, and I'm fairly sure that others wouldn't. But I think we think it's right. That was a very interesting question back to Darren. We had some of these conversations when we were recruiting Stuart. Undoubtedly, one of the plus points was obviously the elite and the coaching and the performance, but the connectivity through the game. There's got to be a broader responsibility. Of course, it's all about winning, and we all know that we all get judged on whether you win or not. But I think there's a broader responsibility about standards, values, how the game works, how you connect across it. And there's a thing as well, that one of the things we're obviously looking at in this World Cup is, I think people like that, I think, want to get behind a team and will support it. And for us, with the fortunate thing of most of our games being at Twickenham, I think it's going to be very important that the country gets behind you, that you feel that the team is genuinely earning that support. And that's all part and part of the cultural thing we were talking about earlier. But I think that connectivity and an acceptance of responsibility. I mean, the slightly different thing about going back to rugby, I mean, currently something like 73% of Premiership rugby players are English qualified players. And so that's a very important thing as well, about connection with the game, how they feel about that. And that goes exactly through to the point about sustainable success and making sure that you have years of an ability to get through. I'm sure Andrew is looking at who are the 18-year-olds that are coming through, what are they going to do? I'm sure it's true of every sport. And I mean, we've been very lucky that we've won 2 years out of 3 the Junior World Cup. So our under-20s, we think, are in a very good place to be coming through and building that as well. You're only going to build that if you're at the bottom of the pyramid in exactly the right place.
Andrew, do you feel disconnected from the grassroots of the game?
Well, I think at the beginning of this summer there was a general perception out there that the England team had lost connection with the paying public, the supporters, the people that play the game of cricket. And that was one of the first things that I felt it was important for us to address. You know, we were playing quite a turgid type of cricket, which wasn't particularly exciting. And actually, you know, the real bigger picture stuff is that if you want to have sustainable success, you need people playing the game in the first place. So you want people to kind of go, it's exactly what Ian said. I want my son or daughter to play that game because of what that sport stands for. And unless you've got a strong identity to your sport, then it's hard for people to kind of go, well, I know what that sport's about. And I think cricket, we can make a lot of improvement in that regard, actually. And, you know, reconnecting with past players, bringing their stories back to life, making sure that the present players are connecting with the younger kids on a kind of a more personal basis.
It was very interesting to read that you've actively brought former players inside, that you've invited the Bob Willises and the Bothams of this world to connect with your current players. It's very, I mean, I remember this incredible sensitivity of our soccer players to any former players saying boo in any way on television. Do you think that there is a lesson there for other sports?
Well, I think you've got to give a huge amount of credit to Alistair Cook for that, because he got it both barrels over the last 18 months from the media. And so for him to be open to getting some of those guys into the dressing room and hearing what they have to say was a big call on his part. I think it's a really healthy thing. I think it breaks down some of those barriers that tend to form between ex-players and current players. But also, for me, it's the first step in a much broader project around bringing some of those players that played for England that might have played 2 tests that everyone's completely forgotten about. You know, what's their story? Bringing that story back to life so that the present players realise that once you play cricket for England, you always have played cricket for England, and they'll start appreciating that there's a bigger picture than just winning or losing Ashes series or getting to world number 1, and it is about growing the sport.
And I think that's a very important point as well. I know Andrew does it as well. Is about recognising. I think there are roughly about 1,000 people who've ever played rugby for England. And we have a board that shows that, so that the players understand as well that there's a heritage here. There's the classic, who's worn the shirt before? And I think that connection
Absolutely.
that Andrew talks about is really important. There's a connection before. It's something more than, it's a bit like you're the guardian of it at the moment, but somebody else will take over from you and somebody have gone before. But while you've got it, let's make sure that you make the most of it and feel that connection. And I think that's very important with the past as it is with the grassroots.
And when you come back to trying to sustain success for the long term, obviously investment is important, obviously continuity is important. There's a hidden advantage that we often miss, because naturally we all tend to put the serial winners on a pedestal and look at how they did it and what did they do to try and influence our ongoing environment and plans. But the thing we miss is those that played 1 or 2 tests and didn't quite make it. We call them the false positives, if you like. What stopped them from succeeding? What stopped them from progressing and going to the next level and becoming a stalwart of the England cricket team, or in my world now, athletics or rowing or sailing? And really understanding the barriers to more people succeeding and the experiences of those that flattered to deceive or didn't quite make it, and trying to educate and develop the younger players to cope. And we mentioned earlier, I think, around young players coming through in the psychology of sport. I think we've actually made huge steps in high performance sport over the last decade in terms of understanding the psychology of excellence, what you need to do to develop the right mindset, how you learn it, how you develop it, and how we identify young people with the right character to succeed on the big stage. And I know that England cricket has led the way in the last certainly 5 to 8 years in terms of looking at that and understanding which players coming up through the age groups have the potential to cross the rope and succeed in front of 25,000 people at launch.
I've got to ask you, you're not going to have a Great Britain men's or women's football team in Rio. How do you regard that?
I think everybody would like to see
everybody wouldn't. Everybody wouldn't, because certainly in Scotland they wouldn't, apparently.
Look, really, first and foremost, this is a matter for the 4 home nations associations. And is it something that we can make happen whilst protecting their individual autonomy and place in the game? Because I think we've all watched avidly over this weekend to see if Wales could get the result against Israel and qualify for the first time, I think, since 1958 for major championships. So I think one of the strengths of Great Britain is the 4 home nations. And it's not just football that this is a challenge for. It's a challenge in a number of sports. Of course, hockey played for 3 years as England. It's England that qualify Great Britain for the Games, and it's only in the last year that they come together as one team. So it's not something it's not a challenge that's unique to football. The thing that I really want to see is the biggest possible team going to an Olympic or a Paralympic Games that's really well prepared, that gives us the best possibility of success and doing better in Rio than we did in London. And the more sports that are there competing, the better.
Andrew, do you learn anything from soccer, do you think?
I've got to say, I haven't had any real direct involvement with anyone from the world of football, actually. And that's a shame, because there are obviously parallels there. You know, the idea of team sports, I think, in some ways are fundamentally different to some of the sports that Simon's in charge of, just in terms of you can only do so much, but you are in some ways at the mercy of the opposition. You know, that if they do it better than you, you're in trouble. And the nuances of the game means that you can prepare for certain things, but some things will just be thrown in your direction which you can't prepare for, and that's where the psychology and being able to think clearly under pressure is so important. So I'm fascinated with the football teams that have been able to achieve sustained success, because there's not a long list of teams that have been able to do it over a long period of time, and also how managers are able to deal with player power, which is obviously so prevalent in football and probably in all sports is probably moving in that direction. In rugby and cricket, it probably is as well. How they're able to keep people aligned to what's in the team's interest rather than just in their own personal interest.
What's your priority in the next month and a half? Is it the priority that you stage a wonderful tournament or that England win?
Well, it's not a simple answer, because I think there are several objectives.
The Brazilians, I was with the Brazilians in Rio de Janeiro last year, very clear that if the tournament was fine, great. If not, oh well, we'll get it right for the Olympics. Brazil winning the World Cup was the priority.
No, I think we've got three objectives, and let's be clear. I think if you're the host nation, you want to be a great host.
Yep.
So we need to make sure that, because third biggest sporting event in the world, over 2.2 million tickets sold. I'm glad to say it's going to be a fantastic event, and we want it to be a great event. This is the ultimate sort of shop window for rugby for the world, not just for England, and therefore it's very important to run a great event. It's very important as well, a much abused word, as we all know, in terms of the dreaded legacy. But it's very important too that we create a legacy for this, because we need to get more people involved in the game as a consequence of this. It would be a great shame if we didn't get more volunteers, more coaches, more referees. And for the last 3 years, we've been planning to invest in that. So you need to make sure that when there's a hope for anticipated growth, especially in the way rugby works, you can't do it without referees, you can't do it without coaches, you can't do it without volunteers, and therefore we've been training and putting resources and facilities into that for the past 3 years. So I think it would be a shame in that broader perspective not to look at what we're doing for growing the game, encouraging everybody to get involved, because it's the best possible opportunity we're there. Now, the ultimate, and sorry, I'm not going to duck the question. Yeah. So, and of course, you get sort of greedy. So you want to achieve that, you want to achieve the other one, and you want to achieve, of course, we want to win. And of course, that will be an addition as well to that sort of shop window and the legacy, because if we win, we all know the impact that will have, and it's very important that we are very, very focused on trying to achieve that. And that's what Stuart and the coaching team are doing, and the squad and the setup. One of the beauties, if you like, of my role, I'm allowed to sort of diverse as well, slightly from that.
Will it be your fault if England don't win the World Cup?
I think well, I'm sure everybody will have a view. I think you're the one that takes responsibility for it, because if you're the chief executive, you have to look at that. I mean, I appointed Stuart. I was the one who believed he was the right person for the job.
Not all presidents and chief executives in all sports take responsibility for anything.
Maybe not, but I think you've got to. I think you've got to take responsibility for the three objectives I was just talking about. Is it going to be a great event? Are we going to grow the game? And and are we going to win it? You know as well as I do, winning global sporting events at the elite level is a very tough call. Am I satisfied? We sat down, I remember, at Loughborough, funny enough, about 3 years ago, and we all said, let's get to a stage where we are now, that we've planned as much as possible to do what we could do. Don't look back and say, if only we had done this. And certainly what Stuart and the team have done is we've planned for this, we're prepared for it, we've done everything we can. Winning elite global sporting events is always very small margins. I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time watching some tennis players and watch many 5-set matches where 1 point in the middle of a third set has decided a 5-set match. And so the margins, and as these guys know as well, are very small. But are we prepared to give it our all? Have we planned accordingly? I think we have, and we'll see what happens. But that's the great beauty of sport. Sometimes you win and sometimes you don't, but we're doing all we can.
Final 2 thoughts on legacy. Has the legacy of the London Olympics really been what Seb promised?
I think the legacy from the London Olympics for high-performance sport has been absolutely immense. We had David Cameron's promise before the Olympics had even finished to sustain the National Lottery and Exchequer investment into high-performance sport through to Rio. That was something unprecedented. We have more athletes in more sports with medal potential for next year's Rio Games than we've ever had before. And over 13,000 appearances have been made by British athletes in their communities, schools, clubs to inspire the next generation. And I think that there's a real opportunity as we go through the Rugby World Cup and into the Olympic and Paralympic Games next year for us all collectively to create a nation inspired by sport.
Andrew, where next for the Ashes winning England cricket team? What is the goal now?
Well, look, I think we probably define our sense of worth too much by winning and losing Ashes series, to be honest with you. You know, there are plenty of other teams out there that you need to be able to beat, and the obvious goal is to make sure you're going up those rankings and getting towards number 1 in the world in both forms of the game. But I think for me, we need a fundamentally different focus on white ball cricket, on one-day cricket and 2020 cricket in this country, because the game has been so aligned towards Test cricket for decades, and we've been consistently woeful in World Cup. So I look at 2019 and go, unbelievable opportunity to refocus and reshape the game in this country, but also incredibly difficult because our game's not set up to do that. So
Test
that's my
cricket
focus.
will live on?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's in very rude health in this country in particular. But the game's evolving unbelievably quickly, and T20 cricket is, exploding all around the world, and we can't afford to be left behind.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in this room at 2 o'clock with my friend Henry Winter, soon to be of The Times, formerly of the Daily Telegraph. But it's been a real privilege talking to our guests. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Cheers, Dave. Well done, mate.